This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's changemaker is Milet Hopping, the president and CEO of the Waco Housing Authority and affiliates in Texas. Milet has led efforts to expand access to housing and oversee more than 80 staff and is helping to find stable homes for nearly 2,000 residents and 6,000 voucher recipients. Working for 3 decades in Waco, Milet joins me on Changemakers. Welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Katie. I really appreciate you and obviously Cordell and what you obviously do for generations of housers. We really do appreciate it.
I am so glad that you're here. We met several months ago. We were on the same panel together, and it was really fun because we were at a Texas NARO conference, if you'll remember. And we were all up there with several other people from, Austin, National NARO. And it was such a great moment because we shared some things about affordable housing specific to Texas. And I cannot wait to hear what you guys are doing because just in the few minutes that we were up there, I learned so much about the redevelopment and some of the challenges. So, thank you for taking the time to come onto this platform.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get going and we talk about all of the development that you're doing, I want to talk about how you first got started into housing. I like to ask this question because there are some common themes, but there's always a fun tangent, if you will, about what drew people to housing. So, would you like to start us there?
So I will tell you that I'm a social worker at heart. So obviously thought I could change the world when I first graduated college. I don't want to date myself, but at one point I did a bunch of different things with runaway kids, with adoptions. But I really lost my heart basically when I got to work with immigration families, families who were immigrants who came to Washington State to pick crops, right? And the family had a culture where they needed the kids to also help pick crops. But what I found was the farmers would house them, and it was basically temporary shelter. So one of the things my job really was about was really getting the kids in school and trying to get a culture that was already very well established to understand how important education was. Most of the adults had never been beyond school 6th grade because it was better to work and work together as a family. But the housing was often converted barns, very bunk like types of housing. And it was there for a crop. I'm here to pick tulips or I'm here to pick daffodils, potatoes, apples, whatever it was. So nobody really felt the need to really house them in a safe, secure place. I will say that the farmers did try in a lot of respects, but for them, you're here for 3 months and you're moving on to the next crop somewhere else. So that's how I fell into housing, not in a traditional housing way whatsoever. Eventually, my husband and I when we started a family, wanted to be around family, and we tossed a coin, to either go to Texas or go back to Massachusetts, and Texas won, and so we came down here, and the very first job I saw that I felt was uplifting was a family self-sufficiency coordinator, and I became that, basically, and I fell in love with housing, could see it fired me in a way that maybe other career paths might not have. I felt really strongly that people could get on a path if they were housed, in a safe environment where you could really talk about issues, everything from mental health to workforce development and reach for goals that maybe you'd never thought of in your whole entire life, that was something you'd ever achieve. So it became a big, uplifting part of my life to start there and get to do that for so long.
I love that your path took the family self-sufficiency. You may be my first podcast guest that started in that particular position. We've had people who started as housing specialists and other roles. In fact, what was your journey like once you started there? Because I think that you were in several positions. You wanna talk about some of that?
Yes. So I started off as the family self-sufficiency coordinator, and sort of became the community engagement person for the agency. So I saw the point that maybe others didn't see in that macro level of instructions, basically, that you had to have the community buy-in if you really wanted to have growth over time. So there needed to be contacts in the chamber with the city, the county. We cover a very wide area, sort of central Texas that nearly touches Fort Worth and then goes almost down towards the south, right? So we have a big area to cover, and it was important that people keep housing and residents foremost in their minds whenever they were having to make decisions. So it became somewhat of a politicking and advocacy, sorry, position that I had not anticipated either. But
Mhm.
it was important, and it was fun to pass that on to the residents and have them, or the participants in my program, and have them realize that they needed to advocate for themselves. They needed to be able to articulate what goals they wanted and what they felt they could achieve, and then what were the obstacles that were gonna get in their way, and how do we work around those? So it was worth every second of time, I think. And then after that, the position of COO was created. I was asked to step in and do that. And so that was a rude awakening too, because I missed my one-on-ones with the clients, and,
Yeah.
as a COO, I now became a grievance, level person. So what I got was not the sort of, "Let's take a step and let's look at this, and where are you gonna go?" I got grievances that I had to
Mhm.
deal with participants. But in the end, we found I found anyway, that now I had to get, used to Section 8 as opposed to public housing, and manage the 2.
Mhm.
So those departments were under me, so was community services. We wrote a lot of grants at the time because that's how we had to get funded. I will tell you that was nerve-wracking. I'm not sure that led to the gray hair I have, but, it didn't hurt. So, because funding is such an issue, right? Funding is an
Mhm.
issue no matter who's our president, no matter who's in office. Um, it's very easy to say somebody else can take care of that.
Mhm.
And we can't let people think that way, right?
Mhm.
We're all citizens of this wonderful country, and we all have something to give if we ever get seated at the table. And so it's our job to make sure that happens.
Mhm. There's always a fight for funding no matter what format or forum.
Hmm.
So, I think the biggest piece is that we get the chance to say before and after of people's lives. Like,
Exactly.
this is what it was before,
Hmm.
stable housing happened. Wow, look what their life was like after.
Exactly. It's a huge, an easy thing to explain.
Mhm.
If housing was embedded in everything, right? I'm saying housing needs to be embedded in education. It needs to be embedded in, as a human right. It needs to be embedded in business. It needs to be embedded in normal or community organizational things. For instance, like VAWA, family abuse centers, advocacy centers, human trafficking. If there was a human need, it needs to be embedded, right? Homelessness would not exist if there was housing that was appropriate with wraparound services.
Mhm.
And so we become the change maker, actually. We become what impacts the
Yep.
community to become something more. And it's always been my dream that Waco would be one of those places where if you came here lost, if you came here not knowing what you wanted to do, that we would have a place for you. We would have the counseling and the work to do together to get you where
Mhm.
you wanted to be. And we've worked very hard to get there. I've been here 31 years. And so I see a huge difference from when I started to now. And it starts with development, of course. My oldest property was built in 1938.
Wow.
Yeah, so Kate Ross is a beautiful, wonderful, solution at the time to widows and orphans and during world wars, and they needed a place to be. And
Mhm.
so Waco took care of that, and we managed it. But over time, it became something else, and now we're behind in what modern, amenities are for apartment complexes. We, struggle to have space. Those units were built at a time when people had less things,
Yeah.
and maybe they lived a much simpler life, but even appliances. So to get an appliance in or get, AC units in or those sort of amenities that everybody sort of expects, especially if you live in Texas, right? An AC is sort of a lifeline. An AC unit has to work. But anyway, so I say all that just to say that, we sort of evolved behind the times, as an industry, I feel like.
Mhm.
And then HUD gave us some tools that allowed us to start doing redevelopment, not just in our properties, but also to create public private partnerships that allowed us to become part of brand new properties,
Mhm.
and that we would have set aside units for voucher holders, and certain things would be not included that might be included in fair market side of units, which would be three times the rent, right? That's always the
Yeah.
problem, and those three times the rent deposits. So by creating those partnerships, we were able to craft what doesn't work for our people who work so hard already at jobs, and they needed to have that step up, not a handout, just a step up. And, we've done 3 already, we're working on 2 more. The first one of those will be, a senior property, that'll be the first one I've done,
Okay.
but I'm looking forward to that. We have benefited from that, so we able to buy some land, we're starting another, project there, and our hope is that eventually there'll be those places for everybody who comes here.
Mhm. We're even seeing places like hospitals and, schools who say, "I can't hire my nurses and my teachers,"
Mhm.
or, "I'm having such higher turnover
Correct.
because they don't wanna commute an hour, there's not affordable housing." And so you see the change in policy from, widows and orphans of the war, who were
Right,
the ones who needed housing, to
right.
where now you have working people, which there are high numbers with working people who still need affordable housing, but it's also now impacting the labor market. It's impacting the ability to staff schools and hospitals, and so this need for affordable housing isn't going away. But now HUD has slowly given you guys tools to develop better. So, but I mean, we can talk about how it's like a decades too late, but but we're there now.
It started, right? It's the same, you can look back on your life at any point in time and look at it with rose-colored glasses or look at it in reality and realize, okay, that's who I was then,
Yeah.
right? Those were the goals that made me happy then. So as time evolved, this is what we need to
Yeah.
be. I will tell you the biggest part about doing these developments for me is that we have a tool here in Texas that allows us to tax exempt the land, but then again, like I said, we craft that partnership because obviously every developer would love to not pay property taxes for however long it is that we do it. Um, but we always ask for 50% of the units to be fair market. And then I have a set number, about 10% to 15% that I want for voucher holders that are under the other 50%, but the other little gap that's in there, is for workforce development. I don't benefit from that. I don't have, I don't have a voucher, that's for people who make over a certain amount of money. That's not how our program works. But what I can see, and I think it helps the community in the long term, is those businesses that we keep bringing to Waco who've got starting wages at $15 an hour, $16 an hour. It's very difficult for their entry level workers who do the bulk of the work.
Yep.
right? To afford an apartment complex that's gonna ask you to make a first and last month's deposit as well as a security deposit, plus all your utility deposits. And then they're gonna ask, you to kind of pay this huge rent, which you
Mhm,
cannot afford.
mhm.
So without being on our program, without any benefit to us, we're setting aside a certain percentage that has to be met. And for the tax exemption to continue to be approved, the the balance of that has to right now be about 10% of 60% of the units, right? That are not not the first 50, fair market's done, and
Right,
that's
right.
so I could explain it maybe better. 100 units are being built, 50 will be fair market. 50 then become what I call affordable housing. I'm taking 10% of that of 50, so 5 to 6 units, and they're for voucher holders. The rest of those units are for those people who make 40 to 80% of income, of average median income here. Average median income differs everywhere in the country, but so we do that, and so those people are already working, but then what we're asking is anybody that is on my 50 side of the units don't have to work, don't have to try to be considered for 3 times the deposit, 3 times
Mm,
the rent. Because most people will say, "Okay, so if $1,500 is the rent for a two-bedroom unit, I have to make at least $4,500 a month." Well, you try telling me how you do that on $15 an hour.
yeah.
It's impossible. So, by doing that, they offer them discounted rents. The developer does that. Um, but for my set of units, then I also craft what I want them to have. I don't want them to pay more than 1 month's deposit. You cannot qualify them based on 3 times the rent because I'm
Right,
paying 70% of the rent.
right, right.
So you will never get to do that, and, they weigh that. They weigh that against the tax exemption and the property, and is it still worth doing? And
Mhm,
most of the time they do. So we have several, like I said, several in place, several that we've done, in that kind of space, and our hope is to, also create, um spaces where we can go up to 80% of average median income at anything we build. So,
mhm.
I think we're evolving the right way. I wish it had happened 10 years ago, Katie, I really do, but the reality is we we were so focused on, I have to make sure that people get their rent paid. We wanna make sure the landlords will still have available units that meet certain standards, of inspection. We tried very hard not to house people in particular neighborhoods. We wanted them everywhere. So that's a consideration for me when I want to partner with a developer. I'm looking at, I don't want you to be all clustered around downtown. I want you to be everywhere because people should have options of where they want their kids to go to school, the same sort of decisions I make, right? When I was, either buying a home or renting, my husband and I would look and say, "Okay, how far is it to drive? Is the school worth, moving here? Is the town itself, developed enough for us, and the way we want to live?" So, I those choices every human has, and they
Mhm.
should have, but for a lot of people, they need to live close to work because they don't have transportation, the way I do to get in a car and just go. So, a lot of consideration is about place, right? So, a lot of times I place partnerships in positions where they're close to the hospital so people can work there. They're close to the mall. They're close to whatever, manufacturing plant is nearby so that they can get there and work.
You mentioned the increase of jobs that's coming to Waco, and, that's great because now you're gonna have diversity of your income and, all of the things that development and economic development brings to a community, enhancing so many different things. I also have seen the change in rent structures. So
Mhm.
give us an idea of what's happened with affordability there in Waco.
So I think for the last, I think in 2022, the city of Waco did a study on housing. right? Just a separate independent study to see where they were. Were they meeting the requirements that were needed in order to have a thriving community, to be able to meet the needs of businesses, and also, existing businesses like schools and firefighters and policemen. And it came up, no, we were 5,000, that was then 5,000 units in the whole.
Wow.
And so, and of those, that included people above 110%. It wasn't just um, our vulnerable population, but it was everybody from there all the way above. Now that's a pretty eye-opening study. So we partnered with the city and other collaborative partners to try to make sure that we started talking about the fact that we needed to do something. So I was already undergoing a RAD conversion at one of my public housing properties. We were in the middle of trying to secure funding for my second public housing property, which we're doing in phases. And I had left my oldest gem to to figure out what we could do because there were so many other problems with that site, infrastructure wise. So um, we started that process and could see what would happen, but then we started doing the partnerships that we do right now. But I will tell you that the rents here have probably increased over 35-45% in the last 5 years. So, there was a time 5 years ago when I was started with the RAD that the rents were about $700 a month, $800 a month for one bedroom apartment. But now it's $1,200. That's a one bedroom, and it just keeps climbing every year. It is not going back down, and so the hope that it will is sort of unrealistic.
Mhm.
We need to be really looking at things and saying, "Okay, we need to embed some kind of automatic increase." And there probably isn't a perfect formula, but we're looking at 5 to 10%, to keep that growth happening. Or we try to build with products, and systems that allow us to keep the rent fairly steady.
Mhm.
So it's a combination of a lot of things in order to address climbing rents. I think that probably there are lots more, smart people around that would probably tell me that they have at least 10 other ideas I could do. But for us, this is how we did it. And we did it as a collaborative community. I think we've worked very hard. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a developer who wanted to build 300 units. He was willing to do the 50-50 model. uh, but he wanted to build by a school I knew had just finished doing some um, work to take in a school that was closing, the kids from a school that was closing. And so I called, and because of our relationships, talked to the superintendent, and her staff, and they said, "Yes, we can only absorb that." So, obviously, I'm not gonna build 300 units where you make the most money between 2 and 3 bedrooms, um, which means there's children right next to a school that
Right.
doesn't have that capacity.
Yeah.
So, it is housing that has to be able to say, "I love what you do. I love your product, but this is not the right location. I will not, put this school at risk for that." Because we all need to work together to live together happily if we want to continue to thrive. So, it goes back to that whole embedding housing in everything.
Yeah.
Everything has to have housing.
When the tension of affordability used to, back in the day, be, a problem of Dallas and Houston, and Austin, but
Yeah,
now you're seeing cities, all across the nation, not just Waco, that are now confronted with the new affordability challenges. There may have been not as much supply, but you could still find some affordability. But now what I'm hearing you say, and I'm seeing this across the nation, is that cities are like, we're almost double what it was in rent.
right.
So not only are we lacking in the supply, but now we have the affordability pinch that wasn't necessarily there 5 and 10 years ago. And so what you're doing is developing and increasing that supply, but making sure that it's developed in such a right location.
Right. It is, and I think I don't know that that's the exact formula for all solutions, but to be honest with you, I think that we have to be realistic about where you are and what is needed in your particular community. So I have noticed that our seniors don't really have the most up to date kind of amenities to live in. Bars everywhere. Um, we want wider hallways. We want the type of knobs that make it easier for somebody with arthritis to get in and out of a unit. But also we need to be considering that socialization helps mental health,
Yeah.
and seniors don't quit learning things. They want to learn. They like their jazz exercise and all those other components that we have always just sort of siloed ourselves into housing. So we need to be building what I would consider a community hub, right? A hub that has technology available to everyone. And the digital divide is probably something that you, of all people, could probably do an entire sermon about, so I'm not gonna touch that one, but it's an issue, right? It's not something we can just ignore,
Yeah.
but I think that we have an opportunity in this sort of growth period to say, "We need those community hubs, and they should be inside these sort of, these housing units that we bring into the 21st century, that we say when you drive by, "So where's your public housing?" That's where's the Section 8 housing? So you want to, do that, but you cannot do that. Everything ends up being, how important your staff can support the residents, right? But also how important it is for the residents to support themselves.
Mhm.
So there needs to be some sort of a hub where childcare is, because that's always a problem. Um, where you can have these technology classes where people who, they're 80 years old and perfectly healthy, but they don't know how to operate a computer, and everything gets sent to you by that now, your Social Security statements, your banking.
All your medical appointments, everything's going to a portal. Yeah.
Exactly, and they're like, "Portal?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we need those hubs, to be there, but they shouldn't be limited to just an apartment complex. They really need to be a community hub.
Tell me about this go to college tour,
Ah,
'cause
yes,
I think this is what we're talking about, but I'm very impressed.
yes.
I wanna share that have you share that.
Okay, so first, let me tell you that as housers, we've done a poor job of creating future leaders, right?
Yeah.
We've been so busy manning regulations and,
Yep.
um, funding that we have not paid attention to who comes after us.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that we wanted to do, and it's been in existence now 26 years, I think. It's 25 years, 2 years we couldn't go because of COVID. But this is our 25th year of an actual trip, but it's actually 26 years in existence. So what we do is we take kids from both public housing and Section 8, not a ton, they have to be chosen, they have to be good grades, they have to be
Yeah.
having no problems in school and so forth, obviously with parent approval, and we choose either in the state of Texas or out of the state of Texas, and we fundraise, we do all kinds of things, which I'm in the middle of doing right now, so if anybody wants to give me some money, I would take it for the kids, for the go to college trip. So, one year we went to Little Rock, and they learned everything about, Black history and what happened there. They went to Oklahoma City and visited all these colleges, but also it's a trip that expands knowledge through cultural events and museums and as well as college. The colleges have been fantastic, right? They're willing to have the kids come hang out all day. They give them swag. They talk about how college is funded, what they need to be doing now to get ready to be accepted. Um, some states, like around Texas, have a mutual it's considered in-state as opposed to out-of-state, tuition and expenses. But I will tell you that I think, they for a lot of kids, they've never left our development. This is the first time they're really going somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, maybe when they're in high school, they're on the football team, they go over there, but they're not going somewhere like this, where they don't know the other kids on the trip. We have volunteers from the city of Waco. We have my own staff that goes, parents that go. We have one parent for 2 kids. So there is no losing them. That was my biggest fear when we were dreaming
Yeah.
this first, right? Please don't let me lose the kids. Um, and I will tell you that for the first couple of years, I would sleep with the company credit card underneath my pillow in the event that they called me and some emergency had happened.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but anyway, um, glad to say nothing has ever happened, but churches have helped us, fund things as well. We just really it's about a $10,000 trip every year. A shout out to Post Investments last year, they funded the entire year, and the kids were phenomenal. I will tell you that we did do, a trip by plane. Um, and a lot of kids did not want to go on a plane, they were
Oh,
terrified. Um, their parents were dropping them off at the airport, and they were very scared. Uh, but their parents I love that. Parents who've never been on a plane too said, "No, I've always wanted to travel, this is something you need to do." The benefit of that is that eventually, right, after these experiences, we try to include those kids in other types of events for other youth so that we can share those experiences with them. The knowledge is not the same as when you get to experience it yourself, but it is worth doing. I
right.
think, there is no way that I could tell you, that these kids have not been absolutely phenomenal as they grew up. I have a girl who works in Houston who, was top of her class at University of Houston. She did the 3 and 3, education for her law degree, and so she now works in Houston full time. We have business owners in several other states that they had eventually visited and liked and moved there. So we have several of, independent business owners, and so I will tell you that it's been one of the most successful things we have ever done here. And we've created leaders, right? We created leaders who understood that things could be different if the right energy was put into them.
Yeah.
And, they're the example of the success that that program has always brought about. So, we've been very blessed, I will say, with wonderful people who've acted as our chaperones, a lot of, kids who who weren't sure what they were gonna do, but I will tell you it was a leap of faith from the parents that kicked their butts on the bus and said, "We're going," right? So I really do think, they will look back on it now and tell me all the time if I run into them that this was the best thing they ever did as a kid,
Excellent.
and so they don't have to be the president of the United States. I just wanna know they're happy and that they
Yeah.
can take care of themselves, and now they're positive community members wherever they live, and they give back in their own way. So, I
Mhm.
think we did the right thing. I just
Mhm.
wish I could take every kid.
You definitely did the right thing, and I think what you're explaining is that the kids are getting, clarity of mind when they go out of their comfort, and they're
Exactly.
also challenging their assumptions about staying put,
Mhm.
and you can't do that, just down on your same old street, and so
Right.
you have if you've never ventured out, then you don't see what opportunities are, and I think that's there's only so much as school classrooms can do about
Right.
talking about life, but then you're providing a forum by which they can go out and see, experience, feel, vision, brainstorm, maybe even dream about options for them, and that is crucial when we talk about the person's life before and after. Um, when you're just struggling to pay the bills
Right.
and just trying to get basic needs of education and housing met, you don't think about, hey, there's a whole nother realm of opportunities that don't have to be excluded for me. And I think you're providing a great forum by which it reminds them that there are some options on the table.
We have some amazing numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head, so I'm sorry for that. I should have prepared for that. Um, but I do know that when we've had discussions with kids, there's a business owner who now runs his own home health organization in in another state, and his comments were that you could never get from somebody standing behind the podium, no matter how famous, no matter how wonderful they are, what they got when they got to go to those schools.
Mhm.
And they met people who looked like them, who understood the music they liked and all those kinds of things, so they connected easily, and then they gave them so much knowledge. They told them, "Look, this is what the form looks like. This is what you're gonna apply for." Um, and while nothing against schools, I think there's a lot about life learning you can't do in a school.
Right.
Other than I really did benefit from my typing class, back in the day, and I did benefit from
Right?
the personal finance class because I
Yeah, yeah.
can budget my checking account, although I'm always off by a couple of cents. So those 2 things, were really helpful
Yeah.
life experiences. Um, but what school does for you and what we tried to do with those trips is to explain, "Look, you're meeting people who do all kinds of things with an education or not." Um, you know, the museum curator has a degree, right? This is what they do. How do they choose the art they want to show on the walls? They're discussing that. Those are conversations they might never have had, and we don't know how each kid is individually impacted by those things.
Right.
But I will tell you that we took the plane trip to Washington, DC. We didn't lose any kids. So that I'm gonna say that up front. They went to several colleges around there. Cost was really scary, right, for going to college for a lot of the kids, and they explained about scholarships and all kinds of things. But one of the nicest things was that Senator Cornyn from Texas had come to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and talked to the kids about how Congress works, how how they are represented, that they do have a voice when they vote. And I think it really made it an understanding or a connection with the kids that our government does work for us. It's supposed to work for us. And I know there were several at the time who wanted to be politicians. I'm not sure that as they age, they still want to do that. I'm not going to discourage them. But anyway, I do think that he did that just before they took the tour of, the Congress and how people vote and whatever. And one of the commentaries from one of the kids was, "Why aren't there more people in their seats?" Like, that was
Yeah.
you know what? That's a good question. I don't have an answer for
Great question. Yeah.
but I really did appreciate that, first the senator came. We invited everybody, but he's the one who came. And then all the people that helped us, all those colleges from Florida to Washington, DC, and all the way over to, Oklahoma and Arkansas. Um, our kids have learned so much from those trips. I don't know anything I could probably say that would ever be able to put that into, um, the richness that it added to their
Mhm.
lives. It's
Yeah.
and so, but what I did see from it was those kids who've participated over all these years have done something with their lives. They're independent business owners. They've gone into military service. Some kids are not ready for don't believe in college, right? They wanna go right to work, but they chose paths based on
Yeah.
something they had learned, from those trips. And and really, that's how my community will be richer in the long run. So if I could replicate it, 2 or 3 times a year, I would. I just can't. Funding is always questionable. So, but we do believe in our youth. We cannot ignore them. When we think about leadership, we should be creating community leaders every time we turn around.
I agree. I'm hoping that our listeners here are saying, doing an introspective and saying, well, wait, we don't have anything like that. And so hopefully they can replicate hearing what you've done and the results that you're creating. So, which leads me to my next point. You won NARO's Outstanding Professional of the Year. Uh,
Yes.
we we can all see why now. Um, Tell us what that meant for you or how that came about.
So, apparently I was nominated. I would never have nominated myself for anything. However, I was so floored when I was told I had won that because I didn't understand how it came about. Very thankful to be recognized. I guess up until then, I always thought the work was,
Mm,
the recognition, right?
yeah.
The housed people, the lower numbers of homeless people or whatever was my recognition. Until then, I didn't realize how much I really appreciated it, that somebody saw what we were doing, what I was doing. But never once have I ever felt like it was something I did by myself. I have an incredible team here at Waco Housing Authority. But I was lucky enough to be elected Southwest NARO president, and I I think housers are just special people, who think beyond a square box, right?
Mhm.
And because that's how I am, I think we connected in a way I hadn't anticipated. Their support also was very crucial to me getting that award, but also even in my community. I didn't realize how many people had really, uh, been watching, so to speak, but I will tell you that it was not something I was anticipating and would have never, um, worked just to be recognized. But I was so pleased, and we had done so many amazing things, not just here, but as a group with Southwest Naro that I really felt I was getting recognized because we had promoted things, we had worked outside of the box, and we really felt strong in our belief that we can change the world. I mean, we could change it one community at a time.
One community at a time, and I wanna brag on 2 of your projects that I read about while I was preparing for this, which are examples of exactly what you're mentioning when you say thinking outside the box, and, I wanna touch on Shady Acres Cottage and Lovely Village. Uh,
Yes.
will you share exactly what those are? Because I think those both of when I was reading about those, I was like, "Okay, this is an example of doing housing differently." And what you're accomplishing is so different. So, can you share both of those, examples for us?
Let me start with Shady Acres. Shady Acres is a development, that we are creating in a public-private partnership with a developer using tax credit funds. We are building, together. They're gonna use our tax exemption, which we're glad to hand out. That same sort of system of the 50-50 I was talking about. Elderly obviously are not, some are, but not everybody is working. So that 40 to 80%, um, are still gonna be getting the discounted rent because people, when they retire, sometimes have some income coming in. It's just not gonna be enough to be able to afford, what present, costs are. But what we wanted was a location where seniors could be outdoors, that they could have a small putting green, that they could have pets, a place to park their cars, and also a place that had that hub I was talking about so that they could have chair aerobics and they could have other types of activities, crafts and art. But one of the best things about the location is it's across from Fuzzy Friends, which is a no-kill shelter. And they are ecstatic about having this partnership with us because we know that pets make a big difference to seniors. And even if the seniors don't want to keep them, they want to be able to walk the dogs around and have the seniors volunteer to help, all those kinds of things. And who knows what that will lead to. But Shady Acres is going to be our first senior partnership. We have not done a senior partnership before. Um, but I already have people asking about it. Like, when can we move in? What is it gonna be like? And again, it's a situation where we've been very, very consistent about saying we need to make sure that people at this level of income can live here, and then this level can live here, and then the ones who make plenty more can live here. Um, I've always looked at housing as a community issue, right? We all live together. I mean, we do, right? We all have a say in who gets elected for leadership and so forth. Um, and so we're just going to keep that model going. But our community is diverse. Our community is talented and creative, and we need that talent and creativity in everything. And so when we thought about seniors and how to make retirement life more interesting, but still independent, this was what we came up with. And so we're pretty excited about it. We're hoping to add a partnership for some occupational and physical therapy if needed. Um, we'll see. That's still in development. But then we're going to talk about Lovely Village. So, Lovely Village, Waco, for whatever reason, seems to be a trading spot for human trafficking. So people drive from the south here, stop, exchange individuals, and then divide them up to go north, northwest, south, east, however it goes. And so we um we were very lucky to be having talked to the city of Waco. They had a building they wanted to donate. A group that believes strongly in stopping human trafficking, or at least helping women rehab, women and men, because not just women. Rehab wanted to turn this small building into 4 units, which we're going to help them do with project based vouchers, and and then there they will have wraparound services as well. And so part of what's happening is we're housing them regardless of any present problems, whether that's addictions, whether that's just, you know, physical needs or whatever. Lovely Village is just going to be this wonderful dedicated space, even though it's not a lot. But I think it's a partnership that's both public and private, not just about money, but also that the city felt there was such a need to do this. That they're doing this process with them. Uh, so we're all helping create this safe haven. And I'm sure that they have volunteers who will help with those wraparound services. We have community organizations already in place to do that. So I think it will be a place where we actually help people grow. And we have to start with nurturing them, getting them, to a point where they believe in themselves again. So it's extremely important. If I can mention one more project.
Of course.
Again, a public-private partnership with a developer to build on our VA campus here, Doris Miller Veterans Administration. They have a hospital here, and so they deal with everything from mental health to physical ailments and whatever of veterans. We agreed in this partnership to provide 8 VASH vouchers. And so there will be 8 vouchers, actually project based vouchers, VASH project based vouchers assigned to the property. We're going to manage the property, collect rents, and make sure people are getting the wraparound services they need. As well as make sure things are ready for compliance for the developer and the investor. And then they're converting 3 buildings on their site into efficiency units that we are also going to project base, but with a veteran's preference. So we get to go inspect the first VASH voucher units here next week. I think it's the 12th through the 15th that we'll pick a date to go and inspect so we can start moving some veterans in. The buildings that they're converting have a lot of asbestos and other things that had to be gutted pretty much. So that may take a little bit longer, but there'll be 34 units that we're gonna be especially proud to have participated in and taking on a role that, we wouldn't have normally done, like an outside manager of something, unless I owned it. We really didn't want to do that, but it was the only way to keep the costs down so it could happen, and so, it's the way it worked. So, we felt the project was worth, going for, and it's important, I think, that again, what I said before about embedding housing in everything. So those 34 veterans will get to live on the campus, be able to walk to their therapy appointments, to their physical therapy or occupational therapy appointments on a regular basis. They'll have assistance from VA social workers, but also
Mhm.
they will also be able to use our transportation, our events, join our FSS programs. And I think they'll be in a place where they can also become healthier and enjoy life a little bit more since the service to their country cannot be yeah, replicated. I mean, they've done things for us that nobody wants to think about. So it's been really good.
Mhm. And for them to be able to have stable housing, um, to be able to be part of that next phase of life for them. So these are excellent examples of what you guys are not just doing. You're not just providing a voucher, you're not just in the regulations, but you are actually building community, you're building stability. So we appreciate you sharing all of these things. I think in closing, I wanna ask you one last question here, but feel free to share anything else. But, if you could tell your team, 1 or 2 things that says, we're in the midst. We're in the mix of building. We're in the mix of, having to fight for funds or, we're in the mix of all of these current day challenges. If you could tell your team 1 or 2 things though, what where would you focus them and how would you, I encourage them for lack of a word?
Sure. So two things. I would encourage them to not be comfortable in their singular positions. I mean, it's important to know your job, but we have to think out of the box, and I wanna give them avenues to do that. Morrow has a leadership academy they just started. We have one person already attending. So this year, what we did was we asked staff who were interested in becoming future leaders of our agency to fill out an application, and we would nominate one of them, once chosen, to be the ones to attend because it costs money, and they're required to attend at least two um, i- real site national conferences. And the rest they do on computers and with each other on a regular basis. But so we've had applicants come in. We're in the middle of choosing. And so I would want the ones who want more in their lives. They want to push themselves a little bit further to do it and understand this is a safe place to make mistakes. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would tell them is that we need to think in terms of future housing. So it's easy to think 5 years, that's a strategic plan sort of model, but we need to be thinking in terms of 10 and 20 years. For me, at some point I'll be retired, but it would be important that we start thinking about the most environmentally healthy kind of building that we could do that would also have some added benefit to the residents. So I'm thinking utilities, so solar panels, water systems that are, um, you know, recyclable and healthy. Just a lot of other types of building. Maybe, the future looks like it's maybe smaller housing, um, not as big, as we've been all grown up to believe in the
Right.
McMansions, you know?
Mm.
But I think that if you give staff the opportunity to work outside of
Mhm.
regulation, because it's so black and white, right? Our entire industry is so black and white. Um, and they're gonna have to learn to advocate. It as time has gone on for me personally, I have realized that advocacy is probably one of the biggest skills we all need to have. We need to be able to articulate our needs to people who make decisions about our funding. We also need to be able to articulate in exact numbers how that implements or how that affects people.
Mhm.
People, for the people who represent us in Congress. But I will tell you that, we have very much wanted, staff to buy into lots of those things, and it's new. Um, I remember being referred to as the chaos queen because we're in the middle of going paperless.
Ugh,
We're we're in the middle of learning all these
yeah.
new ways to do things from RAD to private development, and everything in between. But I think that they can come to the table with their particular knowledge and feel free to share it. And so I think we need to look at the fact that you have to pass that on. It's not just knowledge, right? Because rules change so much, you might need to get retrained every other year, and that goes for the computers too. But they need to know, A, they can do it, and I believe every one of my staff could do it if they could get past their fear. So, even if you're afraid, do it anyway. Take the leap of faith and go forward.
Mhm. Excellent words. I mean, we're as an industry talking about tiny homes and ADUs and hotel conversions and corporate office conversions. None of those techniques and models were the regular conversation just
Right.
10 years ago, and
That's
now
right.
we're like, we have entire companies who are creating this kind of affordable housing stock with these parameters. And so I think your challenge to us is saying, okay, so what do we need to be in the next 10 years thinking about for the industry to meet the needs and to look ahead? Even um, even people who are doing shipping container uh,
Yes.
home,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, all of
Development
these
and all.
things. Yes, yes.
Um,
So
and I think the other thing I would say is consider a tiered model. So, always going to need, housing that's affordable for elderly and disabled no matter
right,
what. And it
right,
has to build particular requirements, right?
right.
Um but beyond that, yes, people will want to rent, and there may be people who never want to become homeowners. But then how do you bridge the tier that goes from renting to an affordable place, that somebody could live in 10 to 15 years, really develop equity, and then move up, right?
Right.
So, 'cause that's what people do with real estate. So, my thought process with that is a community land trust where
Mhm.
we could own the land like I do with the developers. They would be exempt from property taxes. They would have to pay taxes on their building, their house, so to speak, which is much lower. I'm sure I don't know what taxes are like where you are, property tax, but here they're a little scary. And they would still pay taxes on that, which bridges starts to bridge a gap. They would live in it for a certain amount of time, it has to be owner occupied. We would then at the point of the sale ask, or require 2% or 3% back of the sale to reinvest in the property. But then they would take that equity and go somewhere else because now
Mhm.
the housing goes up. And
Yeah.
so something that is smaller and starts off as a two-bedroom, three-bedroom, doesn't have to be a Mac mansion. It has to be considerate of how close you are to schools, how close you are to work, how close, you are to your family. Um, so we need to do all those things to promote, um, a a bridge that goes from renting to this sort of a model so that there's a gap, right? There's a huge gap between renting and just buying a house, even with special programs from the city, who's helped many people with, homeownership through closing costs and down payment assistance. And then, of course, our community housing development groups like NeighborWorks, Habitat, Grassroots, um, who buy houses that are owned by the city now and rent them, build new, and so sell them. But I think that in the end, we still have that gap, and we need to be able to function, level. So I think people need to be thinking long term in terms of homeownership also.
Mhm. I just had Kevin Campbell from the Raleigh area, land trust on a podcast just a couple weeks ago, and he talked about incorporating, this whole land bank, land trust concept into housing development as opposed to, it being sort of like the people over there are doing this over there. So, yeah, very timely.
It is. It's the only way I think that we can, bring everyone up when they're ready, right? We have to have the housing. So instead of being waiting until we need it and then people going, "Oh, I can move to another city. I can move somewhere else with my company now that I'm working, right? I can move somewhere else." We want them to stay here. We want them to continue to impact our community. We need to be thinking in terms of what the gaps are gonna be like in the future, and I think that's a big one. I think, like-minded people you'll meet all over the place probably all have some way of looking at it. But I agree. I think land trusts are important. I think land banks are important, um, and it also signifies a complete cooperation between several different entities because you're looking at, other government entities, cities, counties, and you're looking at educational institutions. So when you're looking at that and everybody understands, my teacher is only going to make $38,000 a year. Where
Yeah,
is she going to live?
right.
Um, so you have to be creating those things. She might want to rent for a while, but maybe now she wants, a home ownership. She can't afford, the $300,000 minimum here or whatever. I have to provide we have to look at something in between, and I think that we can do that.
Mhm. Well, Millet, it has been amazing to talk to you. I'm glad that, we met, many moons ago on that
Yes.
panel. So I appreciate your leadership and what you're doing for Waco, and, we look forward to seeing you on the next panel at the next event. So thank you so much for your time.
And thank you for sharing the way you share with everybody. I really do think it helps our housing industry in the long run. So thank you, Katie.
Well, you're welcome for that.
Y'all take care.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.